I was sitting on William's porch, sipping lukewarm tea. The day had worn me out. I'd been helping my brother, who was getting worse, cooking meals, and cleaning his bedroom. He barely ate but insisted I prepare real food, like when we were kids. After dinner, he finally fell asleep, and I, exhausted, savored the rare moments of peace. Then the phone rang. John. At this hour? He usually didn't call without a good reason. John, is everything okay? I asked, trying to sound calm. Where are you right now? His voice was strange, tense. In Arizona. Where else would I be? I frowned. You know I'm with William. Why are you asking? John hesitated. I could hear him exhale, as if preparing to deliver bad news. I'm at a party in Tucson, and I just saw Elizabeth. Elizabeth? My Elizabeth? My throat went dry. Elizabeth? Are you sure? My voice came out louder than I intended. Yes, it's her. I thought you might be nearby. But if you're in Arizona, then what is she doing here? My mind raced for an explanation. Could John have been mistaken? Maybe it was a coincidence. But he knew her well enough not to confuse her with someone else. Did you talk to her? I asked, trying to keep it together. No, I just saw her briefly. She's at the party, apparently with some friends. It seemed odd, so I thought I'd check in. There was a long silence between us. I gripped the phone tightly, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. All right, thanks, John, I said, though my head was spinning. I'll handle it. Hanging up, I sat back down. But the calm I'd felt earlier was gone. Why was she in Tucson? Why hadn't she told me? I dialed her number. She picked up almost immediately. Thomas, how's William? Her voice sounded as if nothing unusual was happening. He's the same, resting, I said, trying not to let my emotions slip through. Where are you? Oh, I'm at a party, with some friends, she said casually, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. I froze. Her tone was so ordinary, so calm. A party? You said you'd be at home, watching movies with the kids. I tried to keep my voice gentle, but it came out colder than I intended. Yes, I planned to, but then I decided to drop them off at Mom's. It was a last-minute thing. They're having a great time, Thomas. Why are you asking? Just curious, I said, realizing that pushing further would only arouse suspicion. I'll probably be back late, so don't wait up for my call. Good luck with William, Thomas. She hung up, leaving me even more unsettled. I put the phone down and stared into the distance. Her words sounded sincere, but why was it so hard for me to believe them? Why hadn't she mentioned the party at all when I left? The next evening, I got home late. The drive felt endless, though I made better time than expected. Elizabeth was in the kitchen, tidying up, when I walked in. The house smelled sweet, cookies or pie, maybe, but the scent didn't comfort me the way it used to. You're back? Her voice was as calm as it had been on the phone. She even smiled, as if nothing had happened. Yes, I replied shortly, taking off my jacket and tossing it onto a chair. William's resting. He's feeling a bit better. That's wonderful. You must be hungry. I can heat something up. I paused. Her ease was beginning to irritate me. I decided to confront her. I thought you'd be home. With the kids. She stopped what she was doing, glanced at me briefly, and then continued putting dishes away. Thomas, I told you. It was a spontaneous decision. The kids are with Mom. Everything's fine. Don't you think I deserve to at least know about it? My voice cracked, and I tried to compose myself. I don't understand why you're reacting this way. It was just a party, Thomas, she said, her tone calm but with an undertone of tension. Just a party? I took a step closer. You didn't say a word. Not a single word. You promised to spend the evening with the kids, and then, suddenly, you're in another city, with people I don't know. She turned to face me, her expression a mix of fatigue and irritation. Thomas, I needed some time for myself. Is that so hard to understand? You were with William and I just wanted a distraction. A distraction? I repeated, feeling a lump form in my throat. Elizabeth, I don't recognize you. What's going on? Nothing, she snapped. I'm tired, Thomas. Tired of waiting. Tired of everything revolving around your family, your responsibilities. What about me? Her words pierced through me like sharp needles. Your place? I stepped closer, my voice barely a whisper. You really think you haven't been given one? She turned away, but I saw her fingers trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. Thomas, I can't explain everything right now, she said softly. Just trust me. I wanted to ask what exactly I was supposed to trust, but something inside me stopped. Silence hung heavy between us, oppressive and suffocating. Trust you? I finally exhaled. Are you sure I can? She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring off into the distance. And I realized that in this house, a wall had formed between us, a wall I couldn't climb or break through. I woke up early, but our conversation from the night before still echoed in my mind. Her calmness, almost indifference. It was as if I was overreacting. But something didn't add up. The morning began with coffee and a cold silence between us. She seemed unbothered, as if last night's talk had already been forgotten. I'll go pick up the kids, I said, glancing at the clock. Of course, she replied curtly, barely looking up from her phone. That indifference weighed heavier than any words. Her parents' house was in the suburbs, only a 30-minute drive away. It was just as neat as always, with a pristine lawn and fresh flowers on the porch. I knocked, and the door opened almost immediately. Thomas, her mother said with a wide smile. How's William? He's feeling a little better. Thanks for taking the kids, I replied, trying to mirror her calm demeanor. It's no trouble, you know that. They're in the living room, playing. I stepped inside and saw my son and daughter on the floor, engrossed in building something with a set of blocks. Daddy, my daughter squealed, running to me. Hey, sweetheart, I said, scooping her up and smiling. My son looked up from his toys. Dad, did you know Uncle Sam is coming over today? The world around me slowed. Uncle Sam? I asked, keeping my voice as casual as possible. Yeah, Mom talked to him, he said, still focused on his blocks. She said he might come by. Mom said that? I clarified, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Yeah, 2 days ago. She asked if we'd be home. I felt my mother-in-law step closer, adding, Oh, it's probably one of her colleagues. You know how much she works. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course, that must be it, I said. All right, kids, ready to head home? The drive back was quiet. The kids chattered in the back seat, but their words barely registered. The name Uncle Sam rang in my head like a warning. Who was he? Why had she spoken to him before the party? And what else was she keeping from me? Back home, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, staring at my shoes. The name Uncle Sam wouldn't leave my mind. Was I overthinking? But why hadn't she mentioned this conversation? Or the party? Elizabeth walked out of the bathroom, acting as though nothing was amiss. Her hair was wrapped in a towel, and she sat at her vanity, applying cream to her face with focused precision. How are my parents? She asked without turning around. They're fine, I replied. The kids were happy, playing. She nodded, as if that answer was all she needed, and continued her routine. I watched her, searching for any sign, nervousness, avoidance, anything. But she seemed calm, almost detached. By the way, the kids mentioned someone named Uncle Sam, I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. Do you know who they're talking about? She froze for a split second, then resumed, spreading cream on her cheeks. Oh, that's probably one of Mom's friends. You know how she likes to call her friends aunts and uncles for the kids. Her voice was steady, but I noticed she avoided meeting my eyes. Funny though. They said you talked to him, I added. Me? She turned, frowning. Well, maybe it was a quick conversation, and I forgot. Her tone was light, but her words felt empty, like her gaze. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake again. It felt like everything around me was pointing to a secret I needed to uncover. I decided to walk around the house to clear my head. The kitchen was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of a nightlight illuminating the table. Her phone was lying there. It was locked, and I'd never felt the need to check it before. But now everything felt suspicious. I turned away, trying to calm myself. You're losing it, Thomas, I thought. Opening the fridge, I grabbed a bottle of water at random. The chill burned my fingers, but it grounded me. I took a few sips and was about to head back to the bedroom when I noticed something odd. On the counter sat a bag from a bakery we rarely visited. I knew it was located in Tucson, near her old office. I opened the bag. Inside was a partially eaten pastry, wrapped in a napkin. Scribbled on the napkin was a phone number, hastily written in pen. "What the?" I whispered to myself. The number had no name, no context. I took a photo of it with my phone and put everything back the way I found it. As I walked into the living room, a strange feeling crept over me, as if I were being watched. But the house was quiet. I stopped at the window and looked out into the yard. Everything was as it should be, bushes bathed in the glow of streetlights, a quiet street. Then I noticed the garage door was slightly open. That was odd. I was sure I'd closed it before bed. Slowly, I approached and peeked inside. The garage seemed normal. My trusty old truck, tools, the kids' bikes. But something made me pause. I noticed a pair of women's shoes, ones Elizabeth rarely wore. They were lying haphazardly, as if she'd taken them off in a hurry. My hand instinctively reached for a nearby tool drawer. I opened it to check if everything was in place. Among the screwdrivers and wrenches was a key to our old apartment, the one I thought had been lost long ago. What was it doing here? Elizabeth was always meticulous. She wouldn't stash something like this in the garage. "You're imagining things," I told myself again, but the unease remained. Leaving the garage, I passed by the table where the kids had left their drawings. I rarely paid attention to them, but one caught my eye. It showed a woman I instantly recognized as Elizabeth, with our son and daughter beside her. But to their right was another figure, a man wearing glasses and a hat, smiling warmly. The caption, written in childish handwriting, read, "Mom and Uncle Sam." The lump in my throat grew heavier. "Uncle Sam," I whispered, as if the name itself could unravel the mystery. But what did this drawing mean? Why did it look like this Uncle Sam was part of our family? For a brief moment, guilt hit me like a wave. I'd spent the last few months almost entirely focused on William. I'd been driving to his place every week, spending hours at the hospital, helping with paperwork, cooking, cleaning. William never complained, but I knew how much he needed me. And all that time, what had been happening here, at home? Had I been so absorbed that I missed the signs? The guilt passed quickly, replaced by resolve. "You did what you had to do," I told myself firmly. "William has no one else. You couldn't have done it differently." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Now wasn't the time for self-pity. Now was the time to figure out what was going on, to find out who Uncle Sam was and why his name kept surfacing in our home. I looked at the drawing one more time, folded it, and slipped it into my pocket. Another piece of the puzzle. On the kitchen table, her laptop sat open. She usually took it to the bedroom, but tonight, it was left behind. I sat down, turned on the screen, and luck was on my side. It wasn't locked. The email inbox appeared, and I skimmed through the latest messages. Most were mundane, work emails, promotional offers. But one stood out. It was from an address starting with S.Jones, and the subject line was cryptic. "Discuss details tomorrow." I opened the email. "Elizabeth, thanks for making time to meet. As agreed, I'll handle everything on my end. Let's meet at the usual place. Looking forward to it." No signature, no context. Just this text and an attachment titled Plan. I clicked on the file, but it was password protected. Leaning back in the chair, I felt the tension tighten around me like a noose. What was this plan? Who was S. Jones? The sound of footsteps on the stairs jolted me. I quickly closed the email and positioned the laptop as I'd found it. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, groggy but immediately alert when she saw me in the kitchen. "What are you doing?" she asked, frowning. "Couldn't sleep," I said, gesturing to the water glass. "Just needed to think." "You need to rest more, Thomas," she said, stepping closer. Her voice sounded caring, but there was no warmth in it. She stopped at the laptop, closed it, and carried it back upstairs without even glancing at me. I watched her ascend the stairs and knew one thing for sure. She was hiding something. And now, I had my first real clues. An address, a phone number, the name Uncle Sam, and this mysterious plan. I didn't know what it all meant yet, but I was certain the truth would come out soon. The only question was whether I'd be able to handle it. The morning started tense. Elizabeth seemed distracted from the moment she woke up. Her movements were mechanical, as if her mind was elsewhere. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her pack her bag. "Are you going somewhere?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Yes, I need to take care of something," she said, glancing at me briefly before her eyes darted away. "Take care of what?" I pressed, hoping to catch her gaze. "Just work stuff," she replied, her tone dry, almost dismissive. "On a Saturday?" She froze for a moment, as if she had forgotten what day it was. "Yes, it's something urgent. Documents for a project we're trying to finish," she said too quickly, her voice lacking any real conviction. "Maybe I can drive you?" "I've got time," I offered. She looked at me with a flicker of irritation. "There's no need, Thomas. I'll be quick." "You've been running a lot of errands lately," I remarked, trying not to sound accusatory. "You know how much work I have these days," she replied, slipping her phone into her bag. I wanted to ask more, but the kids burst into the kitchen, arguing over who would get the tablet first. Elizabeth used the moment to end the conversation quickly. A couple of hours later, I dropped the kids off at her parents' house. Her mother greeted us with her usual warm smile, but there was a hint of confusion in her expression. "Thomas, you again?" she asked as she hugged the grandchildren. "Yes, sorry. Everything's just been chaotic lately," I stammered. "William is still sick, and work is piling up. Thank you for always being here." I stood there watching as the kids ran into the living room, where a collection of toys awaited them. My mind churned with the thought that had been haunting me. I couldn't sit idly by any longer. The address from the napkin wouldn't leave my mind. It felt like the only thread I could pull. "You know we're always happy to help," her mother said, but I detected a faint note of doubt. Her gaze lingered a moment longer, as if trying to read what was going on behind my polite words. "Thank you," I repeated, the weight of the words pulling me down. After a brief conversation, I excused myself and left quickly. Standing by the car, I took a deep breath and gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if it could give me some kind of courage. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The address, 1439 Westbrook Street, was my only lead. I had no idea where it would take me, but I had to follow it. The drive to the city center was short, though it felt like an eternity in my head. 1,000 thoughts swirled, each one more tangled than the last. What did I expect to see? What would I say? What if I was wrong? When I arrived, my heart raced. The address led me to a small restaurant with a cozy terrace lit by soft string lights. The atmosphere was intimate, perfect for a romantic dinner. I parked across the street and immediately spotted her car. There was no mistaking it. My palms were clammy as I turned off the engine. I stepped out of the car, scanning the area. Maybe she was here with colleagues. Maybe it really was work. But as I approached the restaurant's window, my worst fears began to take shape. Inside the dimly lit dining area, I saw her. Elizabeth sat at a table by the window, across from a man. They were deep in conversation, her face glowing with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. Her eyes sparkled the way they used to when we first met. The man leaned in, said something, and she laughed, lightly touching his hand. Everything inside me twisted. I could have walked away, pretended I didn't see anything, but I didn't. I stayed. Her fingers brushed against his, and he took her hand in his. They sat like that, holding hands, as if no one else in the world existed. Then he leaned forward slightly. She did too. The moment their faces were just inches apart, I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed open the restaurant door. The chime above the entrance rang loudly, drawing the attention of everyone inside. Elizabeth looked up. Her face changed instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by shock and dread. "Thomas?" Her voice broke as she let go of his hand like it burned her. The man looked at me, his brows furrowing, but he didn't pull his hands back from the table. I didn't know what to say at first. My breathing was heavy, my gaze darting between them. "So, this is where you handle your work?" I asked quietly, my tone laced with restrained anger. "Thomas, it's not," she began, standing up, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, raising a hand to stop her. Don't even try to explain. I saw enough. The man stood up, as if ready to defend her. Hey, maybe we should talk this out calmly, he said, his voice steady, like he had the right to set the terms. Sit down, I growled, glaring at him without breaking eye contact with Elizabeth. He hesitated, then slowly sat back down. You told me you had work. You told me you were busy. And here you are with him. She looked down, as if searching for words, but said nothing. Do you have anything to say? I asked, my voice rising as anger bubbled to the surface. Her silence was deafening. All this time, I tried to convince myself I was wrong, that I didn't understand, that you weren't capable of this, but you're not even denying it. Thomas, she finally whispered, her voice quiet and almost apologetic. Don't, I cut her off. We'll deal with this at home. I turned and walked toward the exit, feeling the eyes of every patron on me. At the door, I stopped and spoke without turning around. You've destroyed everything, Elizabeth. The door slammed shut behind me, and I stepped into the cool night air, feeling my legs barely support me. There would be more conversations, more pain, but for now, I just needed to get as far away from that scene as possible. The drive home felt longer than usual, each mile weighing heavier on my chest. When I entered the house, the door slammed louder than I intended. Elizabeth was already there, sitting on the couch in the living room, as if she had been waiting for me. Her expression was tense, but she didn't say a word. Are you going to explain anything? I began, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay composed. Thomas, she looked at me, but her eyes quickly darted away. I don't know where to start. Start with the truth, Elizabeth, I snapped, stepping into the room. Start with what Sam is doing in our lives. Her face turned pale. The kids mentioned him. Did you know that? They called him Uncle Sam. He's been in our house, Elizabeth, under our roof. While I was with William, trying to help my brother, I trailed off, the lump in my throat making it hard to continue. She remained silent, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. This isn't what you think, she finally muttered. Not what I think, I repeated, barely containing my anger. You were holding his hand, laughing. You let him become part of our lives. I moved closer and pulled the drawing from my pocket, the one I'd found the night before. And this? I tossed the paper onto the table in front of her. Is this not what I think either? Elizabeth looked at the drawing. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. They drew him as part of our family, I continued. Do you understand what that means? She covered her face with her hands. Thomas, please. No. I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. Don't give me, please. You lied to me. You hid this from me all this time. I found his number on a napkin from a bakery. I saw that address. I saw you at the restaurant, Elizabeth. Her head shot up, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Didn't mean for it to happen? My voice cracked under the weight of my emotions. Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed us. Our family. She stayed silent, and I continued, my tone quieter but filled with raw pain. I tried to be a good husband. I've been caring for my brother because he has no one else. And all this time, I thought I could count on you. But you, Thomas, she started, but I cut her off. Don't, Elizabeth. Do you know what hurts the most? My voice shook as I spoke. I left the kids with your mother so you could have time for yourself. And you used that time to be with him. Her face twisted in pain, but I didn't stop. I saw it from the beginning. You were distant. You started disappearing from our lives. But I made excuses for you. I told myself it was temporary. And all the while, you were just erasing me from your life. Her hands trembled, but she still said nothing. Why, Elizabeth? I finally asked, my voice breaking into a whisper. Why did you decide he was worth destroying everything we built? She covered her face again, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't know. Thomas, I'm so confused. I stood just a few steps away, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions I could no longer suppress. You know, I said finally, I might have understood a lot. The loneliness, the exhaustion. but I will never understand how you let him become a part of our children's lives. Her sobs quieted, but I couldn't look at her anymore. I'm sleeping on the couch, I said coldly and walked out of the room. A storm raged in my mind. I didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Things would never be the same. The next morning was drowned in suffocating silence. Elizabeth was home, but she felt like a stranger, a ghost of the person I once loved. I barely looked at her. Our conversations were reduced to curt, practical exchanges, nothing more. I spent the night on the couch, unable to sleep. By morning, the decision came to me naturally. This couldn't go on. The first thing I did was contact an attorney. Our conversation was brief, but enough for me to understand that I had a strong case. The evidence was on my side. Phone records, her lies, witnesses. You could leave her with nothing, the lawyer said confidently. Judges don't take kindly to situations like this. His words didn't bring me any joy. I felt nothing but emptiness. Still, I knew one thing. She wouldn't continue to use me or destroy my life. The next day, I drove to her parents' house. Elizabeth didn't come with me. She simply nodded silently, indicating she'd stay behind. Her mother greeted us at the door, smiling as always, though I sensed she could feel that something was wrong. "Thomas, is everything all right?" she asked. I took a deep breath. This was a moment I didn't want but knew was necessary. "No," I said. "Not everything is all right. Did something happen?" Her smile faded, replaced by concern. "Yes, something happened," I replied, the words catching in my throat. "I need to tell you something about Elizabeth." Her eyes narrowed, her expression tense as she waited for me to continue. "You know, I've been spending a lot of time with William lately, helping him while he's been unwell," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "But during that time, while I was away, Elizabeth, she's been seeing another man." "Thomas, you must be mistaken," she said quickly, though doubt already tinged her voice. "I wish I were," I said, pulling out the drawing I'd found. "But this is what your grandchildren drew. They call him Uncle Sam." Her face turned pale. "Sam?" she repeated softly. "Yes, Uncle Sam," I said bitterly. "He's not a colleague. He's not a family friend. He's her lover." Her mother shook her head, as if trying to shake off what she'd just heard. "No, she wouldn't do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She did. I saw them together," I said firmly, meeting her eyes. "I saw them holding hands, kissing." "Thomas," her voice broke. She covered her mouth with her hand, as if it could stop the pain from spilling out. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I replied. "This isn't speculation. It's fact." She sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping. "My God, how could she do this? To the children, to you?" I nodded, the bitterness rising in my throat. "I'm filing for divorce," I said finally. "I can't stay married to someone who destroyed everything we built." Her mother closed her eyes, her face contorted in grief. "Thomas, is there anything I can do?" "Just be there for the kids," I said. "They're the only ones who didn't deserve any of this." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. On the drive home, her image haunted me. Elizabeth's mother, broken by the truth about her daughter. I knew this would be the end, not just of our marriage but of so many bonds that once seemed unbreakable. When I walked through the door, Elizabeth was standing in the hallway. "You talked to my mom?" she asked, her voice sharp, almost accusatory. "Yes," I replied calmly, "and I told her everything." Her face turned pale, her eyes widening. "How could you?" she hissed. "How could I?" I laughed bitterly. "Elizabeth, you destroyed our family. Did you really think I'd stay silent?" She had no response. For the first time in a long while, she just stood there, speechless. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, meeting her gaze head-on, "and you'll be left with nothing." Her lips trembled, but she didn't say a word. I walked past her into the living room, feeling the weight of my words settle deep within me. The end was closer than I had imagined. The trial was brief but draining. I had expected Elizabeth to fight to the bitter end, but she surrendered almost immediately. Perhaps she lacked the strength, or maybe she knew her defeat was inevitable. My lawyers did their job well. The evidence I had collected was damning. Her infidelity, her lies, her misuse of the time meant for our family. All of it was laid bare before the judge. There wasn't much argument. I didn't gain full custody of the children, but the judge ruled that their primary residence would be with me. Elizabeth was granted visitation rights only on weekends, and even those were limited. It was the best outcome I could have hoped for, and it felt like a victory. Her financial situation ended up as disastrous as her reputation. I ensured the division of assets was minimal in her favor. When the judge delivered the final ruling, Elizabeth sat quietly, looking utterly defeated. Her shoulders slumped, her energy drained. She was a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her parents turned away from her almost immediately after I spoke to her mother. They couldn't forgive her for destroying our family, especially for involving the children in her web of lies and betrayal. "We didn't raise her to be like this," her mother once told me when I came to pick up the kids. "Thomas, we'll always be on your side." Their words were bitter, but I knew they came from a place of sincerity. Months passed after the trial. The children began adjusting to our new life. I did everything I could to ensure they didn't feel abandoned, working tirelessly to keep their world stable. Elizabeth saw them less and less. Whenever they returned from their visits with her, they seemed quieter, more withdrawn. It hurt, but I knew I was doing everything I could to protect them. Her life, as far as I could tell, spiraled downward. Our mutual friends, once a strong support system, distanced themselves from her after learning the truth. Sam, as far as I knew, didn't stick around. He vanished as quickly as he had appeared. As for me, I no longer felt anger or regret toward her. All that remained was an empty void where our relationship used to be. I often thought about the life we had built and how easily it had crumbled. There were moments when I questioned whether I could have done more, been more attentive, more present. But deep down, I knew the cracks had formed long before I noticed them. One evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, my daughter looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, are you happy?" I hesitated for a moment, then smiled softly. "I'm happy because I have you and your brother. That's all I need." She hugged me tightly, and in that moment, I realized that the pieces of my life might never fit back together the way they once did. But the parts that remained were worth everything. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing. We would move forward, one step at a time, and rebuild a life rooted in honesty, love, and resilience.